Well, I was working with Denny O'Neil, famously the biggest bleeding heart liberal in comics, and he wouldn't be offended. I've said that to his face. He wouldn't be offended at me saying that. It was a badge of honor for him. And here I am, to the right of Attila the Hun, and we always got along great, creatively. And I talked to him about this, and I said, look, because Robin is about a teenager, and because teenagers in the real world are facing issues, real issues, guns in school, pregnancy, drugs, date rape. I said, I want to deal with these, but not as an issue comic, not as look at us, we're being relevant, but as stories.
Hello and welcome to CultureScape, the show that interviews the geeks that built modern nerd culture. Today I am here with a comics legend. If you are a comic book reader in the last 30 years, you probably know the name of Chuck Dixon. Over his successful career in writing and comics, Dixon wrote some of the most influential Batman and Robin comics of the time that are still looked up to this day, including some of my favorites like the Nightfall event in No Man's Land. He has a fantastic run on Nightwing. He came up with the DC character Spoiler and the villain Bane and many others. And of course, Bane may sound familiar if you've seen The Dark Knight Returns. In that film adaptation, the villain is based on his character. Dixon also led a prolific run on Marvel characters, including Moon Knight, who recently was adapted for a Disney Plus series, and The Punisher. Throughout Dixon's career, he has watched the rise and fall of the comics industry, the end of the newsstand, and the humbling of the direct market. He's watched the industry fall into political shenanigans and poor writing. Today, we will talk with Dixon about his careers. What's it like being a comics writer? What happened to the industry? How did he end up writing for this publisher called Arkhaven? And where the comic industry goes from here, if anywhere. Hi, Chuck. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Chuck, so it's really neat to have you here. I appreciate it. When I first started reading into comics, my aunt collected them. That was in the 90s. Her favorite was Nightwing, and of course, that was mostly you. So it's neat to get to talk to you here today. You're just a very talented creator, and you're an interesting guy. And having listened to your interviews for this, I think this will be a good episode. So let's start here, Chuck. How did you become interested in comics and writing? What led you into your love of geekery?
Yeah, I don't remember a time when I di- didn't have comics in my life. I don't remember my first comic. I was reading comics before I could read, and then I learned to read basically from comics. So missed a lot of school when I was a young kid, and comics helped me pass all the reading exams. Stan Lee gave me a enormous vocabulary for a 6-year old. So, and then when I was in school, I had a lot of success with creative writing projects. The kids and teachers responded to them well, and I thought, well, maybe this is what I should do.
Wow. So how did you get your first big break into comics? How old were you, by the way? You were pretty young, right?
No, I was actually I really didn't go full time in comics till I was 32.
Oh,
So
okay.
I spent a lot of years trying to break in, and a lot of years working, dead end jobs. Uh, but always aiming toward comics. I didn't have a plan B.
So, so was that difficult for you when you're trying to make it to this industry and you felt like you were doing these dead end jobs? Did you feel like this was an achievable goal, or was it hit or miss? What was the kind of feelings you had back then?
I just knew I would never be happy unless I got to work in comics.
Yeah.
And work in comics in a meaningful way. I didn't want to be an intern. I didn't want to work at a comic shop. I wanted to be a creator, and it didn't matter what it was. I mean, I didn't necessarily have to be on Batman or Spider-Man. I just wanted to be on whatever. I just love the medium. I just wanted to be in whatever venue I could get into. And it was difficult because I started trying to break in the 70s, which was a terrible time to try to get into comics.
Oh yeah. No, comics from the 70s, that was a weird time in comic books. It's hard really to describe. It was to the point where like felt like main stage Marvel characters or DC characters taking back seats to the strangest characters or comics team setups. If you watch any comic YouTube channel, they'll go into some of these more strange ones, like the new Teen Titans had, etc. It was crazy. Um,
Yeah.
so you did not start at DC. That's where people most know you from. But you worked on a story about a much younger character. How who was the first people you worked for in comics, and how did you get into that?
Well, my first regular gig was Airboy at Eclipse, and simultaneously I started, almost simultaneously. I mean, within a couple of weeks, I was sold stories to Larry Hama at Marvel, and then I got a phone ringing here. Right, that's all. So anyway, um, so almost simultaneously, I got two major breaks, and the break with Larry Hama led to regular work on Conan. So you know, that was enough to quit my day job.
And so that relationship with Larry Hama then led on to bigger and better things.
Yeah,
So
that was very, very important. And the break in Eclipse was important because Airboy, the title that I was writing for them, was seen by comic editors who later hired me on the basis of that work.
wow, that is exciting. That is kind of special when you work on a project and you feel like maybe it doesn't have the most mainstream pillars, the most seen, but like there's that one person or set of people that can recognize talent really well and see it and they grab you. I'm sure that must have been extremely exciting at the time since you had worked trying to get into comics for so long.
Yeah, I mean, to have somebody like Denny O'Neil say, "I read your Airboy run and I really liked it, and we'd like you to write Robin." I'm like, "Oh, okay." Like I said, I never expected to write Batman. It just happened.
Yeah, but Batman was then and is still now kind of like that's what people want to do. If they what most normal people, that's where they want to end up. That's the top shelf stuff. Batman, Superman, especially over at DC. So they sent you to work on Robin, and so much of the stuff we see with the Batman family came out of your work. You came up with a character, of course. Spoiler. Uh, what was it like when you was working on these comics? What did it feel like to work at DC? How was it working comics back then, say, versus working in comics today?
Well, I mean, I'm working with Denny O'Neil, the guy who basically, resurrected Batman, took him back to his roots. So I'm working with the guy who built this Bat universe, and that was awesome. And the fact that he had faith in me was awesome because Denny was a hands-off editor. He just hired people he thought were capable, and he let them go until they stumbled. And I never stumbled. And we had a really great working relationship. And he and Archie Goodwin were both mentors to me, both in general as a writer and more specifically on the Batman titles. So it was great. I mean, if a creator knows that his publisher and his editor have faith in him, you know, you can work miracles.
Yeah, then that's definitely true in journalism as well. Having an editor that gets what you're doing, what you're trying to do, and they understand that kind of mission that your project has. That really does help. Where versus you work with an editor that maybe doesn't really know what you're working on is about, or doesn't care for it, or just like you're a nuisance. The work relationship and the stuff that comes out of it doesn't tend to be as good. Um, you were not a fan. I've read this a number of places. You liked the switch. So in the 80s, with you said Daniel Neal, Batman went from what was kind of like a mostly comical character to a much more serious one. You hated the Adam West show. I've heard you say that in a number a number of places. Why was that? What was about the Adam West Batman show back in the day, uh,
Well,
which I
w-
guess now people love? But what was your issue with it?
well, when I was a kid, I hated it because I was like 11 years old when the show came on, and to me, it just was sacrilege. I mean, I was watching the first episode. I was really anticipating because they promoted the hell out of it, but they didn't give you any idea what the show was going to be like. You just knew that Batman was coming. And literally, they would have an ad 10-second spot, Batman is coming. And so I was all excited. I'm watching the first episode, and my parents are watching it with me, and they're laughing at it because it was funny. And I was like, Batman's not supposed to be funny. Batman's a grim crime fighter. He's a badass. He's the Dark Knight. And I just was really angry about the show at the time. As I got older, I've learned to appreciate it. And, I'm very much a fan of it now. I understand what they were doing. But at the time, it just seemed like it was blasphemous.
Yeah, it is kind of fun to think of a little 11-year-old Chuck Dixon who'd been waiting so eagerly for his
Yeah,
Batman show to only go and watch it in the living room, and his parents start lying. It was like, oh no, Batman's supposed to be cool. Don't do this.
yeah, there he is doing the Batusi. I was just crushed.
Oh my gosh. So uh, you were working on Robin. What did DC like about what you did with the Robin character that kind of set you apart? Because they gave you Robin, and then that kind of led to, of course, to Nightwing, then to the rest of the Bat family, and on and on. What was it about your work that clicked so well with DC and your editors?
Well, they liked that I kept to the program. I didn't try to change the character from what basically Alan Grant had developed Tim Drake quite a lot. And I just continued what Alan had done and then, added more things to it. They wanted a character that would succeed where Jason Todd had not, and they wanted me to figure out what made Jason Todd fail and avoid all of those pitfalls. And so I took Alan's basic development of the character and then just use that as my guide. Whatever Jason Todd would do, Tim Drake will do the opposite. And then, of course, the first miniseries sold way beyond DC's wildest imagination because they gave me projected sales figures, and we blew past that the very first day. And so that's what they were most happy about was that it succeeded.
What kind of sales figures back in because when you started, I mean, you started before you started in the kind of heyday of the comics boom, and then you worked right through to its eventual collapse. What was it? What was considered like good numbers in 1990 versus like, well, what do you think they say is a good number now for sales of comics?
Well, they told me that I asked Denny. I said, "What do they think this will sell?" I was just curious, and he said, "Well, we did a Catwoman. We launched Catwoman, and that sold around 175,000 the first issue, and we think that Robin will do about that number." Well, like I said, we did that number first day. It sold through, and they went every time I would visit DC. They go, "We're back. We're going back to press again." They went back to press over and over and over again on that first Robin miniseries. And so I have no idea what it sold in the end, but my wife and I referred to our second house as the house that Robin built. So gives you an indication because you get paid royalties, but of course your royalties, while they were generous, are a small portion of what the title earned. So I don't know what the final sales figures were on it, and of course it sold through with trades. Then we did a second miniseries, which sold even more. So yeah, those were great numbers. Today, great numbers like if you can crack 30,000 at Marvel and DC, I think you're doing good. But back then, I mean, I've worked on books in the '90s, sold 3.5 million copies. So
Jeez, that just does not happen.
no,
Like
no,
not even third. Like did these like to give the audience like it's considered sometimes pretty good if you can get like a 30,000 sales now. It's like good
yeah,
job. And compared to like a 3 million, I mean, it's just
yeah. The
it's
impact is
pitiful.
not there anymore.
You now I love what you did with the Batman family. Like I said, I got into comics. My aunt collected them. She was a huge fan of Nightwing. She loved Birds of Prey. She had a lot of Tim Drake, and all those were all kind of in your wheelhouse. The Tim Drake character is a really great one. I think the influence you put on him. I think some others too, like Mike Barone, had some interesting influences there. Tim Drake, of course, today is not the same character of Tim Drake as in the past. What exactly happened there? with Drake. What went on between when you left and 30 years in the future from when you're working on Tim? How did that drastic change happen, and what was it?
Well, I mean, they made him bisexual for some reason. And that was I guess their marketing gimmick for that month was, the boy wonder is bisexual, which terrible idea. It's just a horrible idea. I never sexualized any of these characters. And people go, well, but you had them in romantic relationships. Yes, romantic relationships, not sexualized relationships. When you start talking about a character's sexual proclivities, you've sexualized them. It's no longer a romantic relationship.
Yeah, yes, I think sometimes they miss that. It's like it's not so much, well, it is partially maybe that it's a very hot issue and can divide people, but it's also what are you dragging their brains to? What are you making them think of that otherwise they wouldn't have? Um, I always found what happened to Tim Drake weird was because having read Tim Drake, I was like, this guy he's dated an awful lot of ladies. But this doesn't seem to make much sense to me. And basically the go-to Tim Drake girlfriend on and off again, of course, is Spoiler. Spoiler is an interesting character. I heard you talk a little bit about this on Ethan Van Sciver's show years ago. Do you want to go into how that character came together, and what was that like?
Well, she was created as a plot device. I thought she was going to appear in one arc only. It was Tom Lyle and I were doing some work on Batman, and I wanted to do an arc where Cluemaster has a daughter. We just revealed that he was married and he had a daughter, so we didn't know much about Cluemaster, so it was wide open. And I thought he's got a daughter and she's a rebellious teen. And how does the teenage daughter of a supervillain rebel? Well, she becomes a costume vigilante out to ruin her dad's crimes, and she becomes the spoiler because she's going to spoil all of Cluemaster's schemes. And it was fun for like a 3-issue arc, and I thought we did a good job. And I was prepared to never think about the character again. And then this is when we get letters. Letters started coming in. I mean, hundreds of letters. And it wasn't will we see spoiler again? It was when will we see the spoiler again? And so I had to think a lot more about the character. I mean, who is she? What's her motivations? What's she like? And then of course, because she's around the same age as Tim Drake, it's natural. Boy, girl, they share an interest. There's going to be some, propinquity there, some tension, some draw, romantic angle, and and it all just sort of grew out of that organically. And I've often said this: of all the characters I've created for comics, she's the one that seemed most alive in my mind. She really took on a persona of her own.
What do you think it was about Spoiler that drew so much fan attention? What element do you think you really nailed or understood that seemed to make the difference? Because that she still is, even though she's not handled nearly as well as when she was in your hands. She's still a pretty popular character.
Yeah, I think she was relatable because she was, she came from a lower class background. I mean, her mom was a single mom because dad was in jail all the time. Mom worked as a nurse. She wants to be a vigilante crime fighter. She's like Peter Parker in the early Spider-Man stories, has to make her own costume. Her vehicle is a dirt bike because it's the only thing she can afford. And I think it just made her relatable. And she's a teenage girl, so she makes mistakes in her life. I mean, she got pregnant, by some guy who obviously didn't care about her, things like that. But I never showed her as, stupid or anything else, but somewhat impulsive, as rebellious, but a likable character, a smart character, a dedicated and courageous character. And I think people just responded to that. She wasn't some sort of plastic uh, token female.
Yeah, she was 3D. She
Yeah.
felt like an actual character instead of a placard or whatever. That brings us to a good point. Is that a mistake? I think a lot of people who maybe didn't read comics back then, or they just assume like they didn't cover social issues back, when comics try to be less divisive. Like maybe we'll put it
Right.
that way. It
Yeah.
wasn't so much you guys won't cover it, but you wanted to handle it fairly. How did you figure that out? Like, with the spoiler having the pregnancy, how did you figure out how to find a balance to cover the issues? Because you wanted to not you tried to cover both of it. You were like, we will cover the abortion side of the debate, but we'll also cover like maybe there are problems with adoption. How did you figure out how to do that? What was the culture like back there where they were thinking that way?
Well, I mean, the culture politically, there really wasn't a political culture at Marvel. There was at DC a little bit more. But I was working with Denny O'Neil, famously the biggest bleeding heart liberal in comics. And he wouldn't be offended. I've said that to his face. He wouldn't be offended at me saying that. It was a badge of honor for him. And here I am, to the right of Attila the Hun. And we always got along great, creatively. And I talked to him about this and I said, look, because Robin is about a teenager, and because teenagers in the real world are facing issues, real issues, guns in school, pregnancy, drugs, date rape. I said, I want to deal with these, but not as an issue comic, not as look at us, we're being relevant, but as stories. I want stories to grow out of these things. And, I basically told Denny, I don't want to do what you did in Green Lantern, Green Arrow, which is basically put the political issue to the front and to
Mhm.
hell with their main story, as long as you got your point across. I said, I don't want to get a point across. I just want to present these issues as story conflicts and not tell a reader how to feel about them one way or the other. And on every one of the issues I mentioned, which Denny and I had entirely, completely polar opposite views on, we were able to find a common ground to build the story on. And that's what we did. I mean, these were great excuses for, dramatic um, storytelling.
Yeah.
And that's what, did. Because I thought teenagers would relate to a book that was dealing with problems that they were familiar with in their own environment.
No, and it makes sense. I think the way you handle the stories too, it does a better service even to those debates or each side of the debate because you're letting people decide for themselves, consider the merits of each, or maybe it's a mixture, and you actually let people like think about it. I think what we're seeing so much now is that media, especially comics, but media in general, they want to do the thinking for you. They don't really want you to be like, well, this is kind of like it could go either way. This is a little bit of a contentious issue. It's like
Right.
maybe it's not obvious which is the moral right cause, because like most things in life, it's give and take. And I think those stories we always find them richer. I mean, that's basically what House the Dragon is. It's going on right now for Game of Thrones. It's like, yeah, both teams have some good points. Whereas then you watch something like Rings of Power, and well, in Rings of Power, it feels like no one has any good points.
No.
That's another issue.
Yeah, I mean, it's like the end of Doctor Strangelove when they're all arguing in the war room,
Mhm.
and all of their ideas sound lunatic, but you know, yeah, you understand that this is their earnest opinion, and you can actually nobody's telling you whose idea is crazier. And I like that. You leave it up because it's entertainment. It's not indoctrination.
Or God forbid you write a character that has a different view than you, the author, does. Which
Oh yeah, I
that's
get
another
yeah.
thing.
Yeah, I'm in trouble now in my Levon Cade novels for writing a racist character who's actually interesting. I'm obviously not in favor of him being a racist, but he's a fully rounded three-dimensional character that, in some scenes you actually kind of have to like. So it's these things challenge the reader, and it seems more like the real world to me. People are just more complex than one label that you put on them.
Yep, definitely true. So working on Robin, of course, led to Nightwing. Nightwing's a cool character. We kind of covered similar things like you did with Spoiler. Eventually, Nightwing leads you to you get to you're at the home plate. You're up front of line. They're giving you the big bat. You get to take on Batman. Uh, What was it like, by the way, when you found out you were now going to take on Batman? Was that like a moment where you're like, wow, I have really made it?
I just couldn't believe I was doing it. I just I'm like, I heard someone who broke into stand up talking about doing stand up, and they said their first night on stage was, what if they figure out I'm not a stand up guy? What if they figure out I'm not really good at this? So I remember my first Batman arc that I wrote for Denny. He assigned me a 3-issue arc on the Batman title. I handed it in and said, I don't know if I have another Batman story in me. And he said, "Well, let's worry about that later." So, and then I just sort of got in the groove. I just sort of got, immersed myself in Gotham City, immersed myself in that world. And then when Graham Nolan came on Detective with me, that's when it really blew up for me because, Graham is such a Batman scholar. So it was two guys really, giving 110% on every page.
Yeah, your run with Batman, especially Detective Comics, is fantastic. I think you might have gone 100 issues. I think with Detective,
No, it's like
it's
85 issues.
it's up there though. It's pretty
Yeah,
high.
but there's a lot of other Batman. I was on the title for 11 years on various miniseries, annuals, specials, whatever.
That adds up fast, considering how
Yeah,
how many Batman titles there is. It's interesting in comics today. Basically, the only comic I think they're at the big two that I can semi rely on having something that looks like a story is with Batman. And that's probably why DC, I swear, half their lineup are Batman titles now.
yeah. I think it's a character that they can always find a writer that wants to do it because I mean that's the Mount Everest. That's the one everybody wants to do, which is why I never pitched for it. It's like everybody's pitching for that. Let me write Challenges of the Unknown.
Yeah, no, that's smart thinking. It's like go for the place where there's room and go from there. So you did all kinds of controversial things on your run. I mean, they're just really solid comics. But for example, you brought in the character Bane, who tragically wounds Batman, and the Batman gets replaced by a ninja, or basically a ninja,
Yeah,
Nightfall.
yeah, he's like a Catholic ninja.
Of course, we could talk about Bane. What was it like when you did that? When you guys replaced Batman? Did the fan mail start to get a little less than supportive?
Yeah, the fans hated, the Asbat character, the Jean-Paul Vallée. They hated him, but of course, we wanted them to hate him. But we thought, well, they'll hate him, but they'll find the story so engaging that they'll keep buying it. Well, sales started to crater, because people are like, "I don't like this Batman." And so the gimmick was supposed to go on longer. It was another 6 months, but we had to end it early to save the books because, readers responded so negatively. So our goal to show the readers that they did not want a psychotic loner Batman, paid off in spades, because they turned their backs on it.
I like the Nightfall story probably a little bit more than most. I wish there were more adaptations of it. I think Azrael's a fascinating character and stuff, but you don't actually get a lot of adaptations of Nightfall. What you do get is the villain, of course, of Bane. Bane is, if you've seen Dark Knight Returns, the bald guy that wears the funny mask, and like the beginning of the movie, he like directs the planes to fly under each other, and anyhow, great movie. That character Bane, it's pretty close to what you wrote. You wrote the Bane character, and he became popular. What inspired you to do Bane? Because Bane is he's kind of a different villain than the typical rogues gallery for Batman.
Well, basically, we needed a replacement for KG Beast. We needed a guy who was the physical and intellectual equal of Batman. And KG Beast, there was no more USSR, so
Made it a
KG
little
Beast was,
difficult.
yeah, he was, relegated to the ash heap of history, and, so we needed a new character like that, and Denny wanted in Nightfall to create a new villain anyway, and for the longest time in setting up Nightfall and beginning it, uh, we had a placeholder name for this unknown villain that was gonna break Batman's back, um, but eventually it got down to where we're gonna have to actually name this guy, we're gonna have to create him, give him a backstory, and I remember, saying, "Well, this is gonna be difficult because for this for this whole thing to work, this 2-year long continuity to work, this character has to click with the readers. They've gotta respond to him in a big way, and how do you purposely go about creating a popular character?" And I made such a fuss about it that then he said, "Well, if you think it's gonna be so damn hard, just you do it. Go home and do it." And so, I got the task, and I knew Graham would be drawing his first appearance, so I got Graham on the phone, and we threw a bunch of ideas around and, came up with what we came up with. We wanted a tragic past. We wanted a sort of a mirror of Bruce Wayne. And I recently read about how North Korea, you could be jailed for your father's crimes. I
Hmm.
thought, well, what if, and we knew Bane was going to be connected with Venom. And I said, well, why not have him at the home of Venom, this super steroid, Santa Prisca, this made up Caribbean island. And he's actually born in prison to serve his father's life sentence. And what kind of monster would come out the other end of that after, 30 plus years of imprisonment? And that's how Bane was created. I got his name by going through the thesaurus. I looked up evil. I looked up all the words, and there was Bane. I thought, Bane, that's pretty cool. And I
You're
called
like
them
that.
and I said, I
That
want to
one's
call
not
this guy.
taken. That one's not
Yeah,
taken. This
yeah,
is
that's
that
the
one.
other thing. And this was the 90s. Everybody was being called, Devil Dog or Werewolf, or I was like, no, I want, simple name, simple name. And when I told them at DC, my editors, they said, yeah, I want to call him Bane. They're like, oh no, we'll come up with something better than that. And then 3 days later, we were all calling him Bane.
It stuck. Why did you guys go with the breaking? Why was the choice that you would break Batman's back? That would be the injury that would take him out of his career as a superhero. Like, did someone have back issues on the staff, or how did you guys decide on that?
I think it was the idea that it was a really terrible injury that he could come back from. You could come back from it. I joked at the time, well, if Gloria Estefan could come back from it, Bruce Wayne can. She had broken her back in a really horrific car accident. Yeah. And 2 years later, she's back up on stage dancing like nothing had ever happened. So, and Denny was under a lot of pressure to do something major with Batman after the death of Superman, but we didn't want to kill him, that. And so Denny came up with the idea of giving him this massive injury. And of course, once he brought up the backbreaking thing, I was like, well, how will he come back from it? And my sister-in-law is an ICU nurse, and she gave me all kinds of advice on what would have to happen in the first 12 hours after the injury, and advice on what would his physical therapy be like and all that kind of stuff. So because I'm always a logistics guy, but yeah, that was the idea. I mean, it's a horrifying injury. It's also visually very visceral image. Bane just bending Bruce Wayne over his knee. So it all worked perfectly. I mean, you know, I can't imagine, breaking his legs or blinding him or something like that. It just wouldn't have had the same effect.
No, that makes sense. Yeah, your stuff is very thorough. I like that you work so hard to get inspiration. One of the weaknesses of the Dark Knight Returns, the Bane adaptation, I think it misses some of that. Or like,
Yeah.
for example, like Batman, his back injury happens, but he kind of comes back without too much of, or at least not medical help. And I always
Well,
thought that was kind of weird.
it was typical of a Nolan movie. There's just too much in there. He puts too much in the movie. It's like not a feature length story, but he just sort of crams it all in. So,
So, are there adaptations of your stories that you do like?
um, Batman the Animated Series, I like how they did Bane, uh, from the portrayal to having Henry Silva do him with a Latino accent. And then they did an adaptation of a story that Graham and I did, a Harvey Bullock story that was very faithful to the comic. I was very flattered that they hewed that closely to the story we had done.
That okay, yeah, that's interesting because I remember people sometimes complain about BTAS and how they depicted Bane, but he is very brutal and he does have that some of that intelligence. Uh, my
Oh, you
pers-
mean later that I mean, in the second series where he's throwing Batgirl off a building, it's one of the
Mhm.
most horrific animated sequences I've ever seen,
Especially for
and
kids
and he's the
television.
terrifying. So I loved it.
Yeah, I rather like Bane's portrayal in the first season or second season of the Young Justice cartoon. I thought that was a pretty decent adaptation of kind of what you were trying to get across that character. It is fascinating. To segue from this, and of course, want to go through your career. Um, so you did very well at DC. You're there for 11 years. What led you to eventually leaving DC? And of course, you did work with Marvel on different projects. But how did you move from the big two to later cross gen? I think.
Well, Denny retired, and that was kind of the end of an era. Uh, and they hired a replacement group editor who the kindest thing I can say is he seemed indifferent to the task of being a group editor, sort of passive aggressive, and like I said, if you know your editor has faith in you, you can work miracles. But if you know your editor really doesn't even respond, when you send stuff in, you never hear anything back. It's like shouting down a well. You're only going to hear your own echo. So after a while, and then I began to pitch. I would pitch things, and they would go nowhere, and that was unusual for me. It's like, well, at least give me a response or a reason why we're not doing this. And I just realized I'm not going any further here.
Mm.
I've got my 3 monthlies. I started to get the sense that they would love for me to leave. They couldn't fire me because my books were selling well. So they had no justification for getting rid of me, but they would have liked to have gotten rid of me. And I got the offer from CrossGen, and I thought, well, maybe it's time for a change. I think CrossGen was my midlife crisis. So I moved to Tampa and started working for this company that I knew day one wasn't going to last very long because I saw all the mistakes early on they were making that every other failed comic book company made. But it was fun. I would do it again in a heartbeat. It was a blast.
Well, I'm glad you had a positive experience there. Creatives, I mean, this probably is human nature in general, but creatives, that is one of those weird things where it's like being successful does not necessarily mean there's a higher chance that you will continue on doing the thing that you're successful with. I don't know if that's like jealousy or what, but that does happen. You see in journalism too. It's like, well, they just broke up, XY story. You probably should keep them around, and they're like, no, we don't think so. Like, okay, whatever, you're lost. Uh, so you worked at CrossGen for a little bit, and then you got into other projects. I think you did some novel writing.
Yeah, I kind of after CrossGen, I was kind of in the wilderness. I was back at DC in fits and starts for like short periods of time. Marvel wouldn't touch me with a 10-foot pole, and there weren't as many independent publishers around. And I got offers here and there. Thank God for Bongo and The Simpsons, because I continued working for them. And but after a while, there just wasn't as much comic work as I was used to. My schedule was not full, and so I looked at the ebook thing. Hey, I can write a book, publish it myself, and keep all the money. Why not? And so I began writing novels. I had never had an intention to be a novelist. I'm not one of these guys who writes comics because they really want to be writing movies or novels. To me, it's always been about the comics and nothing else. But I still had a mortgage to pay. I still had the creative urge, so I started, writing novels, and to this date, I've written over 30 of them. So
Wow, I did not know it was that many. I was familiar with some of your literature. That was interesting. So was that more a factor because you were freelance then, and it was just harder to get work as a freelancer, or was that more so about the changes in the comics industry?
it was more about the changes in the comics industry because when everybody knew my rep, I was reliable. You know, if you wanted a story about Captain Potato Salad, well, tell me how many pages, tell me the deadline, and I'll probably beat the deadline. And I'll give you something that readers respond to and will sell. I mean, my stuff. I was always into, I want this to be a successful project. So I was used to the phone ringing and just being offered stuff, and that stopped happening. No one was offering me anything. I was persona non grata at DC and Marvel and a lot of the other independents. But I still had some friends in the industry. I mean, Ted Adams reached out to me to do GI Joe at IDW. I did a lot of work there, and just little projects here and there. I did a weekly comic strip for Microsoft. Uh,
I did
you
not
know,
know that. That's
yeah, that's great. If you go to my Subscribe Star account, you can see examples of that. But you know, yeah, I did some manga thing that Marv Wolfman suggested me for. It was like a one-shot manga thing. I can't even remember the name of. A guy in Israel hired me to do a graphic novel about young pirates. I mean, so I was like taking anything that came along.
That's a good segue to have. So what in the world happened to the comics industry? You came into it and it was going strong. People are like a lot of people thought maybe this thing will go on forever. Of course, I don't want to put words in your mouth. So what happened to the comics industry where it went from boom when you started, by the time you left the big, to it gone bust?
Well, throughout the 80s, with the growth of the direct market and the newsstand comics and all these independent publishers, I mean, sales were great. I mean, if you had a worthwhile title with some quality, got a following, you were doing great. And then we move into the 90s, where it just explodes. And you've got comics, once again selling in the millions like they used to in the 50s. And, these comic creators are becoming superstars. And all of a sudden, for whatever reason, it just ended. It's like 1 month we were going gangbusters. The next month you couldn't give them away. Part of it was the bottom fell out of the speculators, but the more mysterious aspect for me was early 90s. There were a lot of kids reading comics for the first time in a long time. And I know this. I would go to cons, and most of the line would be kids, and I was always happy to see that because I was like, this is how you keep this going. We're bringing in new readers. This is the most awesome expectation we could possibly have. And for whatever reason, those kids, and they'll do this, they just didn't buy comics anymore. It's like overnight it was over. And now we're scrabbling, you know, and the comic companies make the worst decision they could possibly make. They withdraw from the newsstand to double down on the direct market. And I knew from my own royalty statements that the newsstand, that was my biggest sales. My biggest sales were to casual comic book readers, not fans. And when they withdrew from the newsstand, it just made everything worse. There was less money coming in, and obviously no new readers, because where are you going to see comics if they're not on the newsstand? They're not readily visible to casual readers, because no one walks into a comic store cold. No one says, "Hey, I wonder where there are comics," and goes to the nearest comic shop. It's never happens. And things just got worse from there. And as really talented editors and really talented publishers began to drop out of the business to be replaced by people who were, as I said, indifferent, the quality drops, and this void is created. And nature hates a vacuum, so the void gets created by people who have a political agenda, and that's when things really get bad. And that's why the sales are so miserable now, because they're just comics are supposed to entertain you and make you feel good, not make you feel ashamed to be alive.
So what did you hear in the comics industry when that drop was starting to happen? What was the common explanation there? What did your bosses tell you?
Well, they always say, "Well, it's video games." I heard this just the other day. I was on a podcast. Say, "Well, video games have hurt sales." I said, "Well, they haven't hurt manga's sales. Manga is doing better than ever. So what is manga doing right that American comics aren't?" And I can go on and on about that. But this is a failure of craft. It's just a failure of talent. The gatekeepers in comics now, with the major publishers, they're just they're left wing trolls. I mean, and everything has to be seen through their lens. And they've hired people who are some of the least talented people to ever work in comics. And there's a few bright spots here and there, but largely you have this huge army of unemployed or underemployed comic talent who have either gotten out of the business or gone on their own into the very, very robust crowdfunding field, self-publishing field.
It's a mess. It's made it really difficult to find comics these days. They're like, oh, you have a feeling like, okay, I'll be entertained. This will lead to something, or I'll go somewhere. And you talk about how political things have gone. Even creators who maybe they put out better than average work, like Tom King, super duper political, always getting into drama, getting people fired. Um, was that must have been a way different attitude than what you were used to when you were back in the 1990s?
Yeah, I mean, people knew I was conservative. I'm an outspoken guy. I'm never afraid to give my opinion on anything. And we would go to lunch or at summits. I mean, summits, we were literally living together for 3 to 4 days at a time, and you would get into these heated political discussions. But once the heated political discussion was over, we just went back to work, and there wasn't any, "Oh, I hate that guy," or, if I ever get a chance, I'm gonna make sure he doesn't get any work. It was none of that going on. It was all this because our work wasn't political. We weren't putting our politics into our work, so like they do now. So it didn't matter what your personal beliefs were, except over the dinner table. But then it became, cliques, and it's not all political. I mean, there was just these cliques formed in comics as the new publishers and new editors came in. And if you weren't part of the clique, if you didn't like the music they liked, if you didn't like the movie they liked, they wouldn't hire you.
Yeah, that is a weird thing about dying industries. Like, because G4 TV just collapsed. I've been writing about that. Sometimes it feels like they become more controlled, not less. Like the people like become more stringent gatekeepers. Because it's similar. It's like all these huge personalities, all these attitudes, and the sales are in the dump.
I mean, look what they did to science fiction. You know, they created rules for science fiction. It's like this is the last genre that should ever have rules. And if you didn't follow them, you couldn't work in the business. You were driven out. And then you look at who the biggest sellers are in science fiction, and they're all the authors who didn't subscribe to those rules.
Yep.
And consequently, they're hated by the science fiction, you know, insider cliquish community. But readers love them.
Yep. One of the partners for this podcast is Bane Books, and they
Oh,
publish
well, perfect
fantastic
example.
stuff. Yeah.
Perfect example. Yeah, I mean, they're like the outlier publisher, also the most successful publisher because of that.
The counterpoint to the issue of comics being a demand issue is, of course, the rise of manga and web comics. And I'm trying to think of what Korea calls theirs. Alternatives to traditional comics, and those sales are strong. Why are those sales strong when Western comics are not?
Well, diversification is, they talk about diversity. Every American comic is the same. It's about some superpowered individual, it's all superheroes. It's all one genre. And comics have never been that, you know. Comics have had times when superheroes were the best sellers and they were the worst sellers. Comics have been through periods where the best sellers were horror, westerns, funny animals, war comics. I mean, Ninja Turtles. And the big two seem to resist that. And then so many of these new independent publishers are like, well, we got to create our own superhero universe. It's like, no, 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 run away from that. Do anything else, any other genre. And that's what manga is. I mean, if you like golf, there's like 6 golf mangas.
At least.
I mean, at least. I mean, one of my favorite mangas is about fishing. I don't fish, but I love this manga. And, there's something for everybody. And that's simply not true in mainstream American comics. Now, in crowdfunding, you see horror, war, westerns, all the rest of it. But in DC and Marvel have become specialists. And it's one of the reasons I'm still around. I never became a specialist. I never specialized in one genre of comic.
So that gives you a lot more versatility, which means you can take on a wider range of projects. You don't get pigeonholed or anything.
Yeah, I'm a guy they think of. Hey, this one's military theme. Get him. This one has to be funny. Yeah, get him. So
Makes sense. Uh, Trying to get back to my train of thought. So I imagine you or someone say that you don't think you're probably going to get a call from DC anytime soon to do some more Batman comics. But there was a short period after you were in the wilderness where you did come to DC for a little while. You worked
right.
on the Outsiders stuff, I believe, some more Robin and Batman stuff.
Yep.
How did you get back into it, and then what pulled you back out?
Well, they asked me to come do Robin, and because they're gonna reveal it. Spoiler, had not died. Whatever
Dun,
stunt.
dun,
Well,
dun.
yeah, she's still alive, and so I said, okay, and I thought, well, I'm back on Robin, and then I was up in New York seeing some publishers, different publishers, and I stopped in at DC, and Dan DiDio who was in charge then, kind of an impulsive guy, and just seeing me in the hallway said, "Hey, do you want to write Batman the Outsiders?" And I'm like, "Well, let's talk about it." And they took it away from Tony Bedard, a friend of mine, who had written 3 issues, and just gave it to me. And I thought it was just on a whim. And so I wrote like 10 issues of that. I think I wrote 6 issues of Robin, maybe. And I thought, well, hey, I'm back in. I started doing store appearances to promote them. And I thought, okay, I'm back in. I got 2 monthly titles at DC. I'm a DC guy again. And then I get a call from my editor, and it basically told me your services are no longer provided. You're off both of your titles. And I said, why? And he says, I can't tell you. Like, what? So then I knew it came from on high. And I never did find out what it was.
That's
And the
crazy.
weirdest thing about it was I did the usual thing I always do is once I get a monthly title and the pay is regular, I just keep writing. So when they fired me, they had about $30,000 in inventory from me that they were never going to do anything.
That is so bizarre because
Yeah, it is.
you have such a strong proven track record, and people have such nostalgia for some of your work. But it's just weird. It's like if Stan Lee were still alive and they decided to pull him off, a Spider-Man book or whatever. He's just like people. There's just you're just gonna get some sales on the nostalgia alone. That is just so crazy. Did you ever get an inkling for what that might be? Do you have a theory perhaps for whose toes you stepped on or why they
Well,
kicked
it,
you
it was
out?
Dan DiDio micromanaged everything, and I don't know what happened. I mean, he got another whim and decided this guy sucks. But the hardest part of it was, creatively for me, it was a kick in the pants because uh, I was really going somewhere on Batman the Outsiders. And I was really upset that, okay, you're taking me off. I mean, I'm just hitting my stride here. I'm really going for this huge thing, this huge story event, and you just sort of cut me off at the knees, and then just replaced me with someone else who was like a Dan DiDio high school friend or something.
Wow, that's lame. So I want to, of course, get into Arkhaven. Chuck, why are you so much more outspoken than your contemporaries? There are a lot of former top comics. I called you a legend. I don't know if I call everyone that, but people who have a proven track record around your age, some older, some younger. But why is it that you're more outspoken and willing to talk about these things? Because there seems to be this fear in the some among the readership, most among the creators for speaking out about what's gone wrong in the comics industry or why the new books suck. What makes you different? Why did you decide that you were going to be outspoken?
But I've kind of always been outspoken, which made me unpopular in some circles in comics. I mean, from day one. If I saw, I didn't care who they were. I don't care if it was the CEO. I didn't care if it was Paul Levitz or Jeanette Kahn. If I saw them doing something stupid, I'd call them out on it. I said, "Why are we doing it this way? Give me an explanation as to why we're missing this opportunity, or why we're doing this, politely. I'm not an employee here. I'm a partner with you. I wanna be here to help. We're all trying to create the highest quality work we can. At least that was true then, and they were. It's like, well, why are we failing here? Why don't we do this? And they would always, they always knew I was very serious about it. That when I said I wasn't griping about pay or griping about another freelancer, which is a no-no. It was always something uh, meant to bring us more success. I was interested in us being successful as a publishing venture, and all of that kind of vanished. All of that kind of went away as the more talented, iconic figures left the big companies. And now it was left to people to whom earnings didn't seem to matter, sales didn't seem to matter. And I just can't exist in that world. And that just made me more outspoken. And of course, now I'm dealing with people who are thin skinned and, prone to outrage, low self esteem. So, I became an enemy
Yeah.
to them. But that didn't stop me from talking about it. And, my work speaks for itself. I think I do good work and I'm reliable. If I say I'm going to do something, I'll do it. And so that can I continue to get work because of that. I'm as busy now as I was in the 90s.
The comics industry could use a lot more Chuck Dixons. I think ev really it could, even if they weren't like, right what did you say? You're right wing of Attila the Hun? Even if they weren't
Yeah,
right wing of Attila the Hun, they could just use more of them. The stuff that you see that the big two do with like even their creators, the shenanigans they're up to, some of it's really gross. Like I think we see Mags, I can't pronounce her last name, Visiago. I can't. I'm not even gonna try again. I think weekly she has some kind of Kickstarter talking about how she needs help to pay the rent. And you've heard similar things from multiple creators at these. And the big two, it used to be the big two is like it's the big two. So it's not only like you're working in the big leagues, but you would also in
right.
your day get the pay to match. And now it seems like these people aren't even getting enough pay to pass the minimum wage. How do they get away with that? Why do people always stay silent? Put aside our politics like left v right. What about politics like you're treating your employees kind of like crap? Uh, Maybe you might want to say something about this.
Well, I mean, my bugaboo with DC Comics in particular is they stopped paying international royalties. They just simply stopped paying them. They didn't send us this nice little friendly letter saying we're not going to pay you international royalties anymore. They just stopped doing it. Now, for somebody like me, it hurts because my work is never out of publication in Europe. I mean, they put out hardcover Chuck Dixon collections in Europe. I don't see a penny from them. And I've asked over and over and over again. The answer is always, we're going to look into this.
Sure.
And I've been hearing this for years. I mean, this is like 2008, they stopped paying them. And um, there's no real reason why. And I point out, this is in our contracts that you owe us this money. You can't simply stop paying us. It's royalties. We're owed them. And it literally says in every contract I've signed, there's a section on international sales, international royalties. But no one will speak up about it. When I first spoke up about it, I thought, well, everybody's going to stand behind me and say, yeah, where's my money? No one. No one's
Yep.
done it because they're afraid, and they'll go, "Oh, well, they might not call me to work for them." Well, they haven't called you in over 10 years. They're never gonna call you. So go in and get your money.
Yep. Being afraid, it can be a learned behavior. It's hard to break out of. A lot of people have
Yeah, I
wondered.
mean, and apparently, they've lowered page rates, which is something that would never have happened back in the day. We're gonna pay you less for this. It's like, that just would never have happened.
No, and that explains even like the decrease in art because art used to be like something was you could even with all the terrible writing that seemed to like something that you could at least get. But even in the cases of now the art for some of these books, just
Yeah,
dreadful. You're like,
yeah.
was the writer half drunk and asleep when he did this? What happened?
Well, and in so many cases, these are what I call tourists. They're not comic book lifers. They're not people dedicated to working in comics. They think that writing and drawing for DC or Marvel is a good resume enhancer for their next job. Uh, Whereas people like me and people like every single person I've ever worked with in comics, we were in it for the long haul. We were where we wanted to be.
why why didn't the success that you've seen, especially when you think of Marvel, all these Marvel products, all these Marvel movies, superheroes are so big in the public cultural zeitgeist. How come that hasn't trickled down to comic sales or just to the quality of the work that these companies put out? It almost feels like the better the movies and the more of them, the worse the comics get. Is that and that's not even getting into the issue of them like make messing with the characters in the movies that are based on comic creators works so that they're legally distinct, but everyone knows like no, that character is obviously supposed to be based on this person. That character is supposed to be based on this person. And Disney just doesn't want to pay royalties.
Right. Well, I think the availability of comics, because they're not on the newsstand, they're not readily available to the public. The public doesn't see, particularly kids, 10-year-olds are not seeing comic books. Um, and the other thing that hurts is the quality of the work. But even when the comics were good, we were doing good stuff. there was no connection between the success of the movies, like the success of the Batman movies and Batman's comic sales, because they just weren't readily available. They also weren't promoting them as comics. They weren't really doing anything. I mean, why not take out a television ad, see what happens? Every time they've done that, it's worked. They did an ad for a GI Joe comic once, and it sold through the roof. So why don't you do that every week? So there's a lot of different factors, but I think the big thing is that kids don't see them, and you need kids. We've lost a generation or two of readers because comics vanished from the culture.
Yeah, it's a reading habit. I mean,
And also, I mean, there's also the factor that if you like Spider-Man, you got Spider-Man movies, you've got Spider-Man games, you can be Spider-Man in a game, and maybe that's enough Spider-Man for someone. But there's enough of an audience where that's not enough, and they want more that should be drawn to the comics and would be drawn to the comics if they knew they existed. I did a presentation for junior high. This was years ago. This was in the 90s when comics were happening. And I did this presentation for a junior high, and I talked to like 100 kids, and I brought boxes of comics because I had all these comps. So every kid got a comic, and they were able to come up and pick their comic out. But it was heartbreaking because number one, I mentioned that I did Simpsons comics, and a kid said, "There are Simpsons comic books?" I'm like, these kids don't even know these comics exist, And then the other heartbreaking thing was they came up to the table and they immediately glommed onto Green Arrow comics, and they were trading back and forth. Kids were trading back and forth to get as many Green Arrow comics as they could. A character they never heard of until that day. And I'm like, this is what should be happening in every drugstore, every 7-Eleven, every supermarket, and it's not.
I have them. When I was a kid, I can remember them being on newsstands, but it wasn't too much later that stopped.
Yeah.
So let's flip back more to your career again. So you decided, what's really big-ish today are indie comics and independent Kickstarters, stuff that's involved with CultureScape. You were a little earlier on this than I think most, and the person you partnered with is a little controversial, I'd probably say. Vox Day, who is an author, and he runs the Arkhaven comic series, which is a mix of different things. And of course, he famously, one of his comics, he has the hero that wears like a Confederate cape. No, a Confederate flag for a cape. It doesn't sound like a Chuck Dixon project, but it's actually one you've been working on for a while now. How did that happen? Why did you like? Did people are like, don't do that, Chuck? It's too risky. Like, how did it like come together?
Oh, 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 I've had so many interviews where it's like, we've got to save Chuck Dixon from Box Day. And I said, well, do you have any work for me? Well, no. So I just stopped working for Vox Day and get a job at Home Depot. Is that the idea? Vox reached out to me. I did a little research into who he was. I thought, this guy's different. This guy's got some crazy opinions, but they're his opinions. I found out, who he was, what he was about, what his background was. I was like, I don't 100% agree with everything this guy says, but I worked with him now a number of years. He's never made a promise he didn't keep. He's never lied to me. He's always paid me when he said he was going to pay me. And he's given me almost, well, on Arctunes, I have 100% creative freedom. I have so much creative freedom that Vox doesn't even know about a series I'm working on until we launch it. I mean, he reads it for the first time with everybody else. I mean, My Sister Suprema came out of nowhere for him. And, it's my biggest success on Arctunes. And why not work with the guy? And people go, well, he's got these ideas, and they quote me things entirely out of context. And then they say, well, you shouldn't work for him because he's this. And I said, well, where were you when I was working for communists? Where were you when I was working for a guy who's an obvious pedophile? You didn't seem to care about those people and their backgrounds. I mean, who cares? It's comics. I'm not writing political stuff. I'm not saying, well, Vox, what do I write about now? What idea do you want put forward now? He would never do that.
Tell me what
Uh,
to do, evil overlord. What are your designs you
yeah,
you wish me to
as long as you
fulfill?
as long as you acknowledge him as the evil overlord, you're fine. But and I've just had a blast talking to the guy on the phone, you know, and just uh, he's done a lot for me, and people refer to me as the legend now because of Fox. So and this is a time when no one was reaching out to me. So, it was him and Richard Meyer, another controversial figure, reached out to me, and now Eric July, another controversial figure, has reached out to me because they know I don't give a damn. You know, I'll work for you as long as you keep your promises and pay me on time.
So why this is the positive thing I think I've seen for comics the last 2 years. There are quite a few now fairly successful Kickstarter comics, indie comics projects, things that aren't associated with big two or even the smaller players. They're just totally their own thing. Why are we seeing such a resurgence there? Are there certain projects you really like or you look forward to? Do you like ever buy into these Kickstarters yourself?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if it's Mike Barron or Graham Nolan or somebody like that, yeah, I'm there to support them. I've done a number. There was a recent thing, it was a Come On Comics. There were these comics connected with gaming miniatures. And comics look really cool, so I supported that. My thing is support good comics. If you see a good comic, support it. Of course, I've worked in the crowdfunding arena myself, and I like it because it's truly diverse in every way. And I see guys like this, particularly Graham. I mean, we've partnered so many times on projects, but I'm so damn proud of him. He's worked so hard to build, his own universe, and it's been extraordinarily successful. And fans have responded to it because it's quality stuff. It's good stuff, and he makes them a part of it. It's this vibrant community. It's what comics used to be, and he's having a ball doing it. And he's making real money, and he runs the business himself. It's, him and his wife do the fulfillment and everything else. I mean, that is not easy. That is not easy. And, he's done it.
It's incredible. I mean, so many of these projects are easily outselling even what the big two are doing. I, I look at Eric. I have friends that are supportive and some that were less supportive, like Eric July, who does the Ripiverse. And their thing was
Right.
like he doesn't have experience in comics. The book itself, he has all these tropes or cliches he hasn't learned not to write yet. He's obviously pretty new to it. My response is like, well, I may not love the book, but I know that he is bringing interest to comics. I think it shows that there is a demand there. People do want to read
Right.
comics. There are enough people out there that love the art form and just the medium itself. They're willing to invest in that. So I don't think people like that are necessarily a bad thing. Even if it's someone like Vox Day, I'm maybe it's because I'm very libertarian and that I'm like the more the merrier. Uh,
Right.
are there any projects right now that you're seeing that you're looking forward to, or things you feel like are really neat or innovative?
Well, Mike Barron's got this Private American coming out, and he's shown me some pages from it, and it's the most badass thing Mike's ever worked on, which is really saying something. I
Yeah.
mean, it's out there. I mean, he's going to piss people off with this book, and I think in a good way. I think that's really cool. He's scratching his Punisher itch, and I mean that's good to see. The other one is from Allegiance Comics, Nora's Saga, which I think is the best American comic of the last 20 years,
Wow.
and that's coming out, in a hardcover edition soon. I'm really looking forward to that. I mean, that's one I'm going to open and just start reading as soon as I get it. But that's you know that's a terrific piece. And again, both of these are not in the superhero genre. They're exploring different storytelling. They're following the manga path of being more diverse.
So if you were given a magic wand, or the Warner Brothers comes to you, say, Chuck, we need you to save DC Comics. We're putting you in charge, Chuck. What do you do? Is it? Can you salvage it?
Well, first I would want a contract about this thick with lots and lots of guarantees that I'm not going to get fired, at the end of the first week. And then I've talked about this on my own YouTube channel. What would I do to bring attention to comics again? Not save comics, but bring attention to them. And then once we have the attention, then the job of saving them starts. And I would just do every crazy crossover I could imagine. I would have an army of entertainment lawyers out there arranging the most insane crossover ideas I could, so that even the most casual comic book reader would go, I think I might take a look at that and just go nuts. And then once you have that attention again, then start, producing, event publishing. Get away from the monthly pamphlets and do event publishing. Get top creators, put them on top talent with high concept story ideas, and then just, market it.
You said you had a favorite comic you've seen the last 20 years. Do you have a least favorite comic? Is there a comic you hate more than any other?
I don't want to say. I don't think I've looked at a comic I hate. I kind of tend to avoid comics I hate. I don't get comps anymore, so a lot of this stuff, thank God, I don't see.
Yeah, okay.
So yeah, I can't think of a comic I've really just liked, because there's so much out there. I just read the stuff. It's not like Netflix where you're watching something, you go, oh my God, why am I watching this? I mean, I binged something last night on Netflix, and I was like, man, this went nowhere. The story just chased itself around for 7 hours.
Yeah, it's sometimes with the streamers, it's like you spend an evening watching a show, and the next day you're like, did I watch something?
Yeah.
I'm not sure I remember.
Yeah, yeah. If you can possibly help it, do not watch The Watcher on Netflix, because trust me, it goes absolutely nowhere.
So what projects are you working on right now, Chuck? You sent me email with some things that you're working at. I think there was something like
Well,
Hunter, Ninja, Soldier, something like that. There was three things.
Hunter Ninja Bear.
Hunter Ninja Bear.
Yeah, Hunter
There.
Ninja Bear's up. Yeah, it's up on Indiegogo. It's from Phenom. It's completely finished. It's not like other Kickstarter or Indiegogo projects where we need the money to finish it. It's finished. It's published. It's ready to ship. So we did really well on Kickstarter, but Indiegogo has a different audience, so we thought we'd let them know about it too. Same deal. And I'm doing My Sister Suprema at Arctunes with weekly installments. I'm doing another strip there called Something Big with Frank Fosco, weekly installments, high concept sci-fi heist story, and a number of other things. There's a lot of stuff at Arctunes that's like reprinted material by me, and there are new episodes of Alt Hero Q coming, because I've seen artwork for them. So there's a lot of Chuck Dixon material to be seen at Arctunes for free. And I just, like, last week, completed a second Conan the Barbarian novel for Vox. And I started a new Levon Cade novel this week, writing a new Levon Cade novel. And I'm involved with a new startup company called Spin Rack. That's going to be like a multimedia, comics, games, NFTs, all the rest of it. And we're in early days on that. You can find that on Facebook.
You mentioned Conan. Do you think you'll ever get a chance to write Batman again? Because as you know, their copyright is going to come up due. Him and Superman and Mickey Mouse, their time is limited. I'm not. It could very well be Congress just punts it like they've done the last dozen times. But do you think there's a chance that would ever happen?
Well, I mean, the thing with Conan is all the Howard stuff became public domain. That's the only stuff I was ever interested in. So you've got all those characters. You've got Valeria and all the rest of them. With the DC characters, the ancillary characters don't come along for a while. So Superman's public domain, but when will Jimmy Olsen be public domain?
Gotcha.
When will Lex Luthor be public domain? And Batman, it's even worse. I mean, Riddler and Catwoman won't be public domain for years. So what do you do? It's just, you know, Mickey Mouse. You go crazy with Mickey Mouse. I mean, but the so much of the stuff, but it's like Tarzan. Tarzan became public domain a few years ago, but all the good stuff, you can't touch because it's still out there waiting to go PD. So yeah, I wouldn't. So if something goes PD as a whole, like when I worked on Airboy or Conan, yeah, that's cool. But the rest, it's too limiting.
Okay, that's interesting. Do you think it will happen though? Do you think they will enter the public domain?
Well, I think before that happens, they'll start licensing them. I think Marvel's already done a little bit of that with IDW, and I think DC. I've heard very, very, very strong confirmations that DC is going to be licensing at least its like B-level characters to whoever wants to publish comics featuring them.
So do you think that's the future for the big two? Basically, is we don't really care about comics, so we'll just sell to whoever wants to write them for us, and we'll take a big chunk of the profit, and then maybe we'll mine some of the stories for our movies and TV. Is that pretty much the destiny for mainstream comics? Is that what do you
I
think?
hope so. I think it's the smartest move. I mean, they don't print their own T-shirts. You know,
Mhm.
they don't do their own action figures. I mean, why would since you're incapable of creating quality comics, why not let people who can create quality comics? My only fear is they'll give them over to, Stalinist monsters even worse than the ones doing it now, that they'll choose people, based on their ideology rather than their talent or their ability to actually sell comics. But, if you were to cut Batman loose and let some people with money move in with top talent, you see some amazing work. I mean, I've already had a number of money people say, when this happens, we will throw money at you to do this stuff. And I'm like, okay. If they ever loosen up, so a buddy of mine, I was talking to my buddy Bo Smith last night, and he said, you know, basically suggested we start making a laundry list of possible B-level DC characters we might want to do.
Yeah, create a grand epic for Kite Man, or I
Yeah,
don't know.
yeah. I'm thinking, if they cut something like the Haunted Tank or Sergeant Rock loose, I'm all over that.
Oh man. Well, this has been fun. Uh, Chuck Dixon, you also have an excellent YouTube show. Where can people find your work if they want to follow you, social media and otherwise?
Well, I'm on Facebook, I'm on Twitter. My YouTube channel is just Chuck Dixon. You can always put my name in at Amazon. There's plenty of stuff there. And of course, there's ArkTunes at Arkhaven.com, which I can't stress enough. It's a high res, free digital comic platform. We're nearing 10 million views. We got a lot of great stuff there, totally diverse, every genre you can imagine. And the resolution is so good you can read these cartoons on your big screen TV in your family room.
Nice.
They come in crystal clear.
Yeah, and it's become harder to read. Like the sites that sell comics legitimately, they almost are always worse than the pirated ones for scams. I don't know why that is. So it's nice that you guys made sure. It seems like such an obvious, like, basic thing. But like, what? Why would you do that? Well,
Yeah, yeah. It's like, yeah, make them look good. You got this opportunity, got the bandwidth, make them look good.
exactly. All right. Well, Chuck Dixon, this was a lot of fun. I learned a lot. It was my pleasure. If the opportunity arises, I'd love to have you back on again in the future. Anything else you
Absolutely,
like?
absolutely.
All right, folks. Well, thank you for watching and listening to the podcast. This has been Culture Escape. And until next time, my friends, see you later.